We are just an advanced species of monkey on a minor planet of a very average star. But we can understand the universe, and that makes us something very special. That's words of Stephen Hawking. Stephen Hawking, who the Vatican may take a while to come around to, but I think we can say is a saint here among us. Stephen Hawking, whose life inspired many, who may be the greatest mathematical mind of our lifetimes, maybe of many lifetimes. Stephen Hawking, who had a playful spirit, and though his life was imbalanced in some extreme ways, was also a great seeker of balance in the greatest sense. And in his very human, very small self, he would play, and he would like to run over people's toes, apparently, with his wheelchair. I've read a few of the eulogies of him this week, and one story over and over people are telling, he ran over people's toes. In fact, he ran over once Prince Charles' toes at a quite fancy affair for Prince Charles. I think he took it in good stride. But his family said that one of his regrets in life was that he never got to meet Margaret Thatcher's toes. No. And they also said this, they said as they expressed his family how much they'll miss him. They said, "It's not much of a universe," this was another quote of his, "it's not much of a universe if it doesn't have the home for people who you love. It's not much of a universe except that it's home to the people who you love." And I think that's why we come to church, to journey together on this exploration of the universe, of understanding the universe, the special gift we have as a species, but to do that in the pursuit also of love, in the company of those we love. I'm going to try not to just fall apart up here. Thanks. Yeah, it's a balancing act. Starhawk is a self-proclaimed witch and a real leader in the neo-pagan world. She writes this: "We are all longing to go home to some place we've never been. We're all longing to go home to some place we've never been, a place half remembered and half envisioned we can only catch a glimpse of from time to time. Community. Somewhere there are people to whom we can speak with passion without having the words catch in our throats. Somewhere a circle of hands will open to receive us, eyes will light up as we enter, voices will celebrate with us whenever we come into our own power. Community means strength that joins our strength to do the work that needs to be done, arms to hold us when we falter, a circle of healing, a circle of friends, some place where we can be free. And maybe I shouldn't admit this, but I forget sometimes about why church is worth it. And maybe that's why I like a little reminder in our opening story each week. For all the challenges and headaches and heartaches and heartbreaks and all the moments of disappointment and in the times when it's just all too much, that quote has been a touchstone for me for many years. I think I first shared it in a worship service when I was a teenager. Community, a place half remembered and half envisioned. Half remembered and half envisioned, where we can only catch glimpses of, from time to time. At the at the UUA, the Unitarian Universalist Association General Assembly a few years ago, then President Peter Morales declared that our task as contemporary Unitarian Universalists in this century is to minister to the most disconnected people who've ever lived on earth. That's us. He shared some statistics to back up the claim. Here's one of them. Over 30 years ago, back in the 80s, there was a study published in the American Journal of Sociological Review. And then again, over a decade ago, they repeated that study to see how the results would change over about 20 years, course of a generation. And the results were startling enough. They got published in the New York Times and Washington Post. One of the key questions was a measure of intimacy. Researchers asked, how many people do you feel you can confide in with personal information about your life? And the first time the study was done, the most common answer given was 3. About a quarter of people said they had 3 people who they could go to confide in. 20 years later, the most common answer was 0. About a quarter of the respondents said nobody. Almost as many said 1. So almost half the population, this was the States, and there may be a little less social deterioration here, but I don't know. About half had none or 1 person they could go to. I can only imagine it's gotten worse since that study over a decade ago. In the recent Canadian studies on loneliness that I found, as many as 25 to 30% of Canadians report a persistent experience of loneliness in their lives. And new, just since 2016, more of us are living alone than any other living arrangement. That's the dominant living arrangement. You know, in every congregation I've served, when I connect with people who are coming into the congregation, the newcomers considering joining, and I ask what brings them, what makes them want to consider making this place their spiritual home, by far and away the most common answer is community. And when I ask people, why do you stick around? You've been here 10 years, you've served on this and that and the other committee, you're worn out, you've seen what a mess this place is at times. As why do you stick around? And they say the community. We long to belong to something bigger than ourselves, long in a big existential way, and in a practical way, the way we get from just being around other bodies week to week, singing together and eating soup together and watching children play together. Damyo Burke is the guiding teacher of a Zen community down in Oregon. She writes about her experience becoming a Buddhist. She says she loved the teachings, the Dharma, and she loved the practice. She found benefits from meditation. But then she was told about the third treasure, the third kind of element of becoming a Buddhist was a community of practice, a Sangha. And she said, was it important to get together with others to practice Buddhism? She said, I associated groups of spiritual or religious people, fairly or not, with all kinds of negative things: prejudice, conforming, judgmentalism, cults. Just a few years before I got into Zen, I had told a friend, if I ever get into an organized religion, shoot me. Familiar to anyone? But get into an organized religion, Damyo did, and ended up saying the Sangha, this Buddhist word for a community of practice, for a congregation, is so important because it provides positive peer pressure. Isn't that a nice phrase? Positive peer pressure. There's been an enormous amount of research at this point on what psychologists in the 1970s distinguish as strong ties and weak ties. Strong ties, you might know this, are the deep, intimate relationships we have, the family members, the close friends. And weak ties those associations with a wider community, with people who we see regularly or on occasion, we say hi to, maybe exchange pleasantries or a little more with. What researchers kept finding to the surprise of many is that for a number of factors like happiness and longevity, the number of weak ties in our lives is just as important or perhaps more important than the number of strong ties. The weak ties are just as important or even more than the strong ties. And so, of course, those strong ties, the deep relationships are important. That jump down from 3 to 0 as the most common answer to that question, it staggers us because we know how important strong ties are. But it can be easy then to miss the impact of our loss of weak ties. So I wonder if you'd raise your hand if you know the name of the clerk who checks you out at the grocery store. So yeah, maybe a dozen of us. And how about if you ever had? Maybe if you did when you were growing up. Is that about a little, maybe twice as many? How about the person who brings your mail? Laurier often brings the mail here while the staff and sometimes volunteers are out eating lunch in the foyer around that table. And he's the first person to deliver mail to me whose name I know. And I only know it because Lynn and Janny cheerfully greet him every time he arrives. And because Joan Cox tells the story about when he was on a different route and came by her house. And they always just called him Laurie, and she never knew it was Laurier. Belonging. Community, it's built not always by intimate conversation and sharing powerful moments, but simply knowing someone's name, brief moments of eye contact, the offer of a smile, and a fleeting comment about the weather. So here's the thing I think we get confused about, I get confused about. Loneliness is the problem. That's not confusing. Loneliness is the problem. But we assume the answer to the problem of loneliness is friends and friendship. And again, I don't want to suggest friendship's not important, and there's a particular sweetness to the symmetrical nature of friendship. You know what I mean by symmetrical nature of friendship? That as a friend, we generally use the term as someone who we have a mutual relationship with. It's not a bean counting, equal tit for tat kind of relationship, but there's some inherent balance in it. This balance can take all sorts of shapes and forms. Friendships can go across generations, and abilities can look quite lopsided to an outsider, but I think ultimately to be a real friendship, the friendship is somehow intrinsically satisfying to both people. It's symmetrical in that way. Here's the blunt, maybe crass way of saying it. In a real friendship, no one's getting paid to be in the relationship. There's all sorts of blurry lines about this, but my point is not actually to say what can or can't be a friendship. What I'm pointing to is this, that we have many valuable relationships that aren't friendships. Asymmetrical relationships, like with a therapist or a teacher. Asymmetrical in the nature of the balance. Are incredibly valuable threads in the social fabrics of our lives. We depend upon asymmetrical relationships with helping professionals, with mail carriers, with grocery clerks, and so many more, not only for the tasks being done, but to weave the depth of belonging we all crave. So the mad farmer and great man of letters, Wendell Berry, offers this image for that belonging. As we clasp the hands of those that go before us and the hands of those who come after us, we enter the little circle of each other's arms and the larger circle of lovers whose hands are joined in a dance, and the larger circle of all creatures passing in and out of life who move also in a dance to a music so subtle and vast that no ear hears it, except in fragments. It's an impossible image to conjure, this dance of Wendell-Berry's. It's a dance that transgresses all boundaries, a timeless and faceless waltz of the cosmos. Weak ties and strong ties and dead ties and ties yet to come. It is just like the music that it is danced to, so subtle and vast that no eye sees it except in fragments. But I've caught a glimpse of it from time to time. I bet you have too. Once was in the congregation I grew up in, about a decade ago. Our church had just undergone the completion of a 12-year-long, multi-million-dollar renovation and retrofitting project to maintain the 120-year-old Oakland landmark. And to celebrate, we held a rededication ceremony in the sanctuary, in the newly earthquake-safe sanctuary. Late on a Sunday afternoon in January, people began to pour into the building, active members, new and old friends, a great flock of ministers. You know how ministers look in a flock if you've ever been to an installation or an ordination. City officials, all packed the sanctuary to the point where more seating had to be added in the narthex. Still, some were left standing. That church had been my home for 20 years, and I'd never seen more people there. And as people stood against the walls, crowded the often empty balcony, as the Oakland Interfaith Gospel Choir, which had started in that building due to the congregation's commitment to welcoming people of all sexual orientations, as they sang the soul of the place, as former ministers had traveled thousands of miles to preach their piece of the history, as we rose together to speak words of commitment, it felt like history unveiled itself. It felt clear that while we were standing dry in that building of the First Unitarian Church of Oakland, we were just as viscerally standing soaked to our knees in the river of community. Fragmentary moments of past and present and future surging and revealing themselves before being swept downstream. I felt like I had a glimpse of that moment in 1891 when 1,700 people gathered in that same sanctuary, spilling over into the streets and the adjoining hall to dedicate the building for the first time. Felt like I could see right there in 1904 the first meeting of what would become Star King School for the Ministry, one of our two Unitarian seminaries, or 1945 when it was used to host the organizing meetings of the United Nations. Saw a great history of luminaries passing through, gracing the pulpit, the Transcendentalist Ralph Waldo Emerson, novelist Jack London, Swami Vivekananda, the U.S. President William Taft, abolitionist Julia Ward Howe, Isadora Duncan, dancing her first dance in a Unitarian church. Clasp the hands of those who go before us and the hands of those who come after us. As I felt that river of the past swelling behind me, I saw visions of my own children growing up surrounded by a community like the one I grew up in. I saw a vision of that church in another 120 years, celebrating another milestone, looking back with gratitude at those who kept the walls from crumbling. In the retrofitting process, they found a brick that had carved into it the signatures of the original masons who constructed the building. They took it out, and the workers who had put their sweat into the building this time around carved their own signatures into it and replaced it innocuously in the wall. In her autobiography, Traveling Mercies, Anne Lamott writes about insisting that her son Sam come to church with her. She knows that it's not a common practice in her peer group to insist one's child comes to church. And it's certainly not always easy with Sam, but she writes, "The main reason I make him go is that I want to give him what I found in the world, which is to say, a path and a little light to see by. Most of the people I know who have what I want, which is to say, purpose, heart, balance, gratitude, joy. Purpose, heart, balance, gratitude, joy, are people who have a deep sense of spirituality. They're people in community who pray or practice their faith. They are Buddhists, Jews, Christians, people banding together to work on themselves and work for human rights. They follow a brighter light than the glimmer of their own candle. They're part of something beautiful." For some of us, this place is home to many of our most cherished friendships. Some of us come to have our whole selves, every part of us, welcomed in an open and caring community. For some of us, the moment we take one another's hands at the end of the service is a lifeline, an essential thread of connection through lonely weeks. So, our people are lonely. Our people are lonely, our people are disconnected, our people are alienated. The smile that you offer a bus driver matters. Pausing to hear an elder's story matters. A friendly chat with your barista could turn their day around. Lingering to listen to someone in your church community who you might not know so well could be a life-saving point of connection. Community means strength that joins our strength to do the work that needs to be done, arms to hold us when we falter, a circle of healing, a circle of friends. Draw the circle wide, draw it wider still. So a poem to close. A poem, a prayer, a cajoling, a commandment. It's from the Sufi teacher Hafiz. Admit something. Everyone you see, you say to them, "Love me." Of course, you do not do this out loud. Otherwise, someone would call the cops. Still, though, think about this great pull in us to connect. Why not become the one who lives with a full moon in each eye that is always saying with that sweet moon language what every other eye in this world is dying to hear? Why not become the one who lives with a full moon in each eye that is always saying with that sweet moon language what every other eye in this world is longing to hear? May it be so. Amen.